Hey everybody, it's Spartan Robot Guy here again, coming to you with my weekly upload. I'm taking a brief break, maybe a week or two from my Battlefront stuff, but I do intend to keep that up. This week I instead decided to highlight a different Star Wars game, a different Star Wars sequel game too. And it's actually kind of interesting to me. I was recently having a conversation with some coworkers about Star Wars, and more than one of them didn't even know that this game existed. I told them that there was a sequel to The Force Unleashed, and they didn't believe me. They didn't think that it existed. They had never heard of it. And initially, I was surprised. But the more I think about it, the more I realize that The Force Unleashed 2 came and went very quickly in terms of development, in terms of spotlight. It was mentioned at E3, and then it came the very same year, if I remember right. And it was swept under the rug just as quickly because it was in every way an inferior game. So it's kind of not surprising to me that it would be now shrouded in obscurity. But yes, there was a sequel made to Star Wars The Force Unleashed. And it's pretty obvious to see why. The Force Unleashed 1 had its flaws, but it was also one of the most refreshing and unique takes on the Star Wars canon up to that time. And to this day, it still stands as one of the most unique concepts. There have been plenty of Jedi simulators. I mean, Fallen Order came out a few years back, and that is still, in my opinion, the pinnacle of Star Wars gaming. But The Force Unleashed was such a, for lack of a better term, it was a badass take on Star Wars, where you were this unstoppable demigod, almost like Kratos in God of War. It's almost like God of War meets Star Wars. So it was a really cool concept, and it was received very well. Force Unleashed 2, unfortunately, was a different story. I won't go into the specifics, but the development was very, very rushed, and that is reflected in many ways in the finished product. So I'll show you guys a quick snippet of gameplay. This is the opening level, so you're escaping Kamino. I won't spoil too much. And here we go. All right, and here we go. We start the level by falling and falling and falling, occasionally breaking things along the way. This is a gimmick that they use more or less once every level, and to be fair, it's kind of cool. It automatically makes you feel like a badass right away to start. You know, in case I didn't already say so, you're running away from Vader, you're a clone of the original Starkiller, and you're trying to escape Kamino. And to be fair, that's a really cool way to open the level, but it gets repetitive and it feels old by the end of the game, as with pretty much everything else in this game. Now, the first thing I'll point out is the dual lightsabers, which is, it sounded really cool on paper, as did most of the new things introduced, but it really didn't change the gameplay at all. Yeah, it was really cool to be wielding two lightsabers instead of one, but the core gameplay didn't ever change for it. Yeah, something I keep forgetting is that Force Repulse is still locked. It's going to be locked for about half of the game. Anyway. And just comparing it to Jedi Fallen Order, where you can swap between single and double saber pretty much any time you want, it really goes to show how simple it would have been to change up the gameplay and make dual lightsabers into something cooler. But anyway, I'm pretty sure, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure a lot of the Stormtrooper models are just recycled from the first Force Unleashed. Matter of fact, I'm pretty sure a lot of these assets were. So here I decided to use my, I think they call it Unleashed mode or something. It's basically a temporary God mode that you charge up, makes you indestructible for a few seconds. Just testing out the controls, so yeah. Well, I'm pretty sure a lot of these animations are recycled. A lot of the, say, the Force Push and the Force Lightning animations look identical to the way they did in the first Force Unleashed. And to be fair, they had a very tight schedule. I believe they were allocated 9 or 10 months to crank out the sequel, so they had to cut corners somewhere. I feel like if they were given more time, like even a few more months, they maybe could have made something a little bit better, but what can you do? And all things considered, just so we're clear, I don't consider this to be a bad game. It's not a bad game by any stretch of the imagination. The only issue is that it's a sequel to a game that it really didn't improve upon. You know, sequels are expected to expand and improve upon games. I would argue that that's fair. And that's one thing that this game failed to do. If anything, it took the core concept and put a couple of cool gimmicks into it, which is kind of cool, but overall underwhelming. Let's see, what else is there to say? You know, the platforming is more or less the same. They didn't do anything to adjust or modify or expand the platforming sections. They're still jumping and double jumping and dashing at certain times to get to certain areas. You can still throw enemies around, which honestly never gets old. Now, something you'll notice is that there's only a handful of enemy types. when they were working on The Force Unleashed 2, they said that an issue with the first game was that there were probably 60 different enemy types, but they all felt more or less the same. Like, they were basically reskins of the same enemies. And here they went for fewer enemy types, but making them more distinct. That sounds wonderful on paper, but when you actually apply it to the game, it just makes the game feel boring because you're fighting the same enemies over and over. Very literally the same enemies over and over. At least in the first Force Unleashed, there was enough of a distinction between the soldiers on different planets where they felt like interesting and distinct enemies to be fighting. That never gets old, throwing enemies into turbines. The upgrade system is intact, but way scaled back. They dialed it down quite a bit. You can't unlock combos. It seems like most of the combos from the first game are just automatically unlocked, and the only thing you can do here is level up the basic Force abilities. And that's another thing I found disappointing playing this game. We'll see it in a little bit, but unfortunately there's only one new Force ability. The rest are rehashed from the previous game. Again, not a bad thing per se, and especially given the time constraints, it can be difficult to come up with original new content like that. But still, it just once again makes the game feel half-baked. Now, to be fair, the one new Force ability they brought in is not only really cool, but very, very useful. So it's a little hard to complain on that front, but still, come on. That just never gets old, just lifting them up and breaking their backs like that. So brutal. Like, that Stormtrooper may have survived, and now he's going to be in a Stormtrooper wheelchair the rest of his life. Like, poor dude. So you got enemies that you can't defeat with regular lightsaber combat, which pretty sure was a staple in the previous game. Using Force Push to break through doors, again, from the first game. I do like the water effects in this level. It's a nice detail. I mean, you're clearly on Kamino. See, knocking over TIE fighters, again, something from the previous game. Just how many times am I going to say this was rehashed from the previous game? Like, I almost feel like with the time they had, instead of making a completely new game, they should have made some kind of expanded epilogue, or made this story a lot shorter and edited as DLC to the first game. I think that would have been really cool, and it probably would have been much more memorable for it. Now here we go, slowing down big turbines, just like in the previous game. It should be a drinking game. Every time I say from the previous game, take a shot. You guys would be severely intoxicated by the end, so don't do that. Knocking enemies into stuff and watching them blow up, watching the lightsaber marks on the different armors, that's never gets old once again. Force gripping objects to throw them around, again, never gets old. Like, if you wanted more of the Force Unleashed, this is what you get right here. Either that or play the DLC missions for the Force Unleashed, which are honestly a lot of fun. Like playing the alternate Hoth and the alternate Tatooine levels is just a really cool idea. And I should mention after this part, so this is the new one and only new Force ability you get in the game, and it's I'll let the game speak for itself.
You're confused.
You get a Jedi mind trick, which actually really comes in handy, especially in the late game where the bosses get increasingly more difficult. And not difficult fair, difficult tedious. They're very tedious for the sheer amount of enemies you have to fight all at once. Being able to distract enemies by turning a few of them against each other really makes for some fun, chaotic moments. As a matter of fact, some of my favorite moments from playing this game come from turning different enemies against each other. Like this guy right here. Literally just told him to commit suicide. That's pretty morbid. I mean, can you imagine Obi-Wan? These are not the droids you're looking for. Now put your blaster in your mouth and pull the trigger. Like, that would have been one heck of a twist. Again, I guess it reflects the fact that this is meant to be a badass, meant to be this, essentially a demigod, a clone of a demigod, but a demigod nonetheless. And here, knocking enemies into the shields and watching them get disintegrated never gets old. I'm not sure how that would work, because in the previous game they just sort of vanish in a quick flash. Here you actually see their bodies for a quick second, and then they disappear. So I'm not completely sure how exactly it works. Is it just so much heat that their body gets eaten up, or is it like a chemical reaction with their body? The first Force Unleashed, I would argue it was just a sheer amount of heat. In this, it seems like it's some kind of chemical reaction that's just disintegrating the atoms that make up their body. Or the cells, I should say, but I digress. Got the classic dodge the turret shtick. that's morbid. Anyway, what was I saying? Oh yes, back to my previous point. I should mention. Ooh, can I take out this dude with Nope, it didn't work. They probably have to be right where the blast goes off. Let's see. Can I get somebody there in time? No, probably not. As I was saying, there was... Ooh, let's see what happens to the Stormtrooper. Ooh, that is not a pleasant way to go. And that's another thing I will point out. There is an issue with navigation. There are moments where it's like, okay, where do I go next? And for a game as linear as this, that's some pretty poor design right there, where you can't even like point an arrow saying, "Hey, go this way, genius." Anyway, as I was saying, and I keep getting off track, there was DLC made for this game, and it's alternate, and it's similar to the DLC in the first Force Unleashed, where it's alternate takes on the films. In this one, you go to Endor and you take out Han Solo, Chewbacca, and Princess Leia. So it's basically concluding the alternate trilogy that they created with the first Force Unleashed with the Ultimate Sith Edition. Which, by the way, is one of the coolest steelbooks I've ever found. My gosh, is it cool. Anyway, this is another one of the standard Imperial enemies you fight. It's called a Ward Droid. It's got this really cool freeze gun, and I feel like it wasn't... it almost feels underbaked, because a gun that could cryogenically freeze enemies, or excuse me, an enemy that could cryogenically freeze enemies, makes for some seriously cool creative potential. It just feels underbaked. Get used to that QuickTime event, because you'll be doing that same QuickTime event probably 150, if not 200 times throughout the story. And speaking of the story, it is very short. Now, let's just see what happens here if I just get some cover and let these guys duke it out. Ooh, just blew them away, dang. Now that's some crack discipline right there. The story is very short and very, very underbaked. Again, they had... Apparently the creative director only had 30 days, 1 month, to crank out a story. So there's a lot of plot holes. It's very short and very... For how short it is, it also feels kind of bloated. It's hard to put into words, but you spend almost half of the game on board the Rebel flagship, and you're basically running around fighting wave after wave of Imperial boarders. It feels a little bloated because literally half the game takes place on this ship when there's an entire galaxy to explore. Talk about wasted potential. Anyway, what was I saying? Well, I'll say it again. What they could have done if they wanted to allocate them 9 months was have them whip out some more DLC. Have them make another round of DLC with this. Take the story idea, dial it down a little bit, streamline it a little bit, and make it into sort of an epilogue to the main story. I think that could have been really cool. Unfortunately, with the ending of the Bad Batch Season 1, none of this is canon anymore, which is kind of a shame. Like, just knowing that Starkiller's story, as far as we know, is no longer canon is kind of disappointing, because, these games are kind of over the top and ridiculous by Star Wars standards, but the story itself was very memorable. It's kind of a shame. I know there were a lot of rumors floating around social media coming up to the Kenobi series that Starkiller was going to show up. And kind of disappointing that there wasn't at least a mention of him. I feel like it could have been interesting to see him as maybe like one of the Inquisitors, or maybe he was the first Inquisitor or something, but who knows. Now that being said, Starkiller can make a great villain for a hypothetical Season 2 of Kenobi. I know Kathleen Kennedy and Lucasfilm has been very open about not wanting a second season, but there's definitely fan outcry for it, so hint, hint, Lucasfilm, if you're listening, if you're watching my video, first of all, like and subscribe, please. Second of all, there's your hypothetical villain for Kenobi Season 2 if you decide to do it. Could be somebody is murdering Jedi, it's Starkiller, but you don't find that out, and Obi-Wan is chasing him down. That's the entire series. That's the entire season, at least. Anyway, I digress. So here we go. Like I said, get used to fighting the same 3 or 4 enemies each level, because this is one of too many bosses that you see in this level. And it's one of, I believe, 6 in the entire game that you see. Now, thinking about the first Force Unleashed, where there were something like 15 or 20 mini-bosses, it just shows how half-baked the game feels. Like, right there, like, I wanted to get through that, ooh, it's kind of Mandalorian. I wonder if that's intentional or not, just how Mandalorian that armor looks. This was before a lot of the Mandalorian backstory was fleshed out, so it's hard to say for certain. Now this area just feels... This just feels like padding, like you're just running. Like if it was designed a little bit better, like maybe the tension was raised a little bit, this might be interesting, but really all you're just doing is running and dashing past stormtroopers. Now where do I go next? Such a short game, I don't know where to go. Okay, big tower. Tall tower. It's a looming tower, if you will. And that's the exit to the level right there. And now we're force gripping TIE fighters again because, you know, that's never been done before in The Force Unleashed ever. What a revolutionary concept. Where credit is due, it is kind of cool that when he grabs them, he crushes them a little bit too. That's a cool detail to me. Sometimes he does. Let's see if he'll do it for this third one. Oh yeah, I remember the time I took multiple hits from an aircraft caliber gun and walked away. Alright, so now we're coming up. If I recall, this is where you get they explain how to use the Unleashed mode, but I already figured out how to use it because I played this game more than I should have. And you know what? I think I will stop talking here, and for the rest of the video, you guys can just enjoy this lovely, albeit repetitive gameplay. One more thing, where credit is due, the FNV cutscenes are very, very good, as they were in the first Force Unleashed, so not terrible either. The water effects on Vader's suit is a great detail. Like, it's little things like that that you saw in the first game and here that you gotta give credit for. Now, in case you can't tell, I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with this game. I absolutely love The Force Unleashed, and the gameplay loop is fun and addictive, so this isn't a bad game, and it's a game I will happily pick up and play. But one of the greatest strengths of the first Force Unleashed was its story. You know, it was such a unique and such a distinct story from anything that came before it within Star Wars fiction. So seeing this, where it's bloated and half-baked and feels incredibly rushed, is disappointing. You know, it's a little hard to realize in the first level, but the enemies and the level design is painfully repetitive. And that was a problem in the first Force Unleashed, where some of the levels felt repetitive, but nowhere near as bad as here. And it's a very short game, too. Like, if on easy mode, if you're just trying to do a speed run, you could probably beat the entire game in about 2.5 to 3 hours. Now, looking at the first Force Unleashed, I think my personal record is something like 6 hours, and when I play the game, I like to take my time and smell the roses. With this game, there's really no need to because there's so little to actually see. There's literally an entire level where you just walk across a field, talk to Yoda, and that's the end of the level, and that's an entire level. So they definitely were on a tight time constraint, which is a shame, because if they had been given ample time, this could have been a really great game. I said it in the Let's Play portion, but I really feel like what they should have done with this time, the level of time they had, was crank out some DLC. Take the story idea, streamline it a little bit, maybe cut it down to like 4 levels, and create a short, like, epilogue-style ending to the game. Kind of like what Fallout 3 did with Broken Steel, where there's a follow-up that raises the level cap and raises the stakes a little bit so you know how the story continues and eventually ends. But that's just me. So yeah, I definitely have a love-hate relationship with this game. It's not a bad game, it's just rushed, bloated, a little repetitive, and pales in comparison to the original. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Like I said, I'm going to be getting back to my Battlefront 2 stuff very soon, but for now I'm just taking a quick little break. So I hope you guys enjoyed this look at The Force Unleashed 2. Yes, it does exist. And feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you again for watching.